In general, I don't get too involved in the rumour space. I've discussed why more extensively before, but I've also always emphasised that this isn't any hard and fast rule for the channel. Certainly in January 2025, when information was pouring out about what turned out to be the Switch 2, there was at least a week where the channel went full on rumour mode, and of course those did turn out to be genuine leaks. That said, I have very mixed views on insiders fully spoiling surprises, given that Nintendo generally do try to surprise and delight, and cultivate their surprises quite specifically. And also, I just love the sport of speculating, so I'm not a big fan of spoilers in general. Well, the new Nate the Hate podcast has dropped a ton of information, and while Nate has certainly had misses before, the fact is that he does have a good track record and appears to be quite well connected, so we need to consider what makes sense and what doesn't in that context. Obviously, I don't want to scoop their content, so I urge you to check out the podcast and support them before continuing with this video, but all the same, let's look at the announcements and discuss a little bit what feels plausible and add any context that seems appropriate. First up, on direct timing, Nate has no firm information, but with March practically over, the current vibe is obviously trending more towards June. It's odd because I was quite cool on the likelihood of September Direct back at the end of last year, but there did turn out to be one, and so I became more open to the idea of a February or March Direct as a result. But I think looking back at my skepticism in September, I was kind of on the right lines, but just at the wrong time. My sense then was that they could carry the winter season on the strength of a Mario 40th anniversary and a few shadow drops here and there, and that's more or less what they've actually done, given that the non-Mario stuff in September was pretty slight, just Fortune's Weave off the top of my head in terms of flat-out new announcements. At any rate, does this mean June is a lock? It certainly feels odds on at this stage, but I'm not necessarily sure it's yet certain. I've discussed this previously, and my feeling is that it will very much depend on Nintendo's confidence going into their financials on the 8th of May. These are a fairly significant event, and they may want to consider their release schedule alongside the performance of the prior quarter, which, remember, will not include any kind of movie bump of the sort that they might aspire to have. I always said that I felt there'd be a quiet first half of 2026 and a bigger finish with a Mario reveal, but some kind of bigger market-sensitive announcement might be helpful before this kind of major fiscal event in order to steady any nerves that might happen among the investors. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean some kind of major hype title for the general audience. Nate mentioned Switch Sports, and I could definitely see a shadow-dropped trailer for a new or Nintendo Switch 2 edition Switch Sports being a significant enough fillip to their lineup to calm nerves, given how well those games have sold in the past and the historic association with the reach into the general audience. It's also the kind of title that doesn't require a Nintendo Direct to actually launch. Recall that Ring Fit Adventure was dropped with a roughly 6-week lead-in and not in a Direct, as I recall. The only window I personally don't see as likely is April, but I always thought they'd want to clear the airwaves around the Mario movie. Of course, my rationale for this was that they didn't scoop strong sales of their Mario back catalogue by announcing a major new Mario, and I do expect an announcement this year, come what may, of a new 3D Mario title. But of course, there's something else that might merit discussion, and do check the timestamps below for where spoilers for one of Nintendo's own Mario film reveals start and end if you want to go to the movie completely unspoiled. But the recent announcement that the Super Mario Galaxy film would feature, spoilers, none other than Fox McCloud was, as I suggested in a prior video, a massive hint that Star Fox would be returning relatively soon, and that certainly seems to be the case. Now, I don't know that they would pin their movie plans around boosting Star Fox, but I'm sure it doesn't hurt that Star Fox is the kind of game that would benefit from such a major launch, and one that they could quite easily keep on ice without anybody being too bothered until an appropriate release window. It also would mean that a major Mario film would be difficult to actually land in the precise window of the film, and so obviously it's a good backup plan to have Star Fox if potentially they weren't able to be sure that they'd land Mario, which they may not be able to do. It just makes sense, if they're doing so much around the film, to have multiple ways to shear the sheep, multiple ways to profit off the back of the film, and so I think a summer Star Fox drop, striking while the iron is hot, is going to be very interesting. Not just because it'll be great if it happens to see Star Fox return after a decade of radio silence, but also because it will give us some idea of exactly what benefit can be gleaned for Nintendo from the movie tie-in, something I think they'll probably be concentrating on quite a bit behind the scenes. Also, I'll talk more about Mario Kart World in a minute, but of course, I'm on record as thinking a Mario Kart Galaxy DLC of some kind feels plausible, and if they're counting Star Fox as part of a galaxy out there, then maybe Star Fox Racing could actually come to pass in a manner of speaking as well, perhaps as other non-Mario characters still getting their due in Mario Kart. At any rate, let's pivot to the other main suggestions in the video, a Mario delay to 2027. Now, I did expect a 2026 3D Mario. I've thought there would be one for a long time, and I remain convinced that this was always plan A. Of course, timing games like this to coincide is always tricky, but I do think that Nintendo aspires wherever possible to use the films as a massive advertising opportunity, and for that strategy to fly, you have to have stuff to actually advertise. However, another long-standing Nintendo forecast rule of thumb is that I always need to keep in mind that the Nintendo projects you love will take, most likely, the absolute maximum time you might expect, and then a little bit longer. That was certainly true for Tears of the Kingdom for the Switch 2, and it seems to be the case as well for 3D Mario. It's rare and I think unprecedented for Nintendo to hit a second holiday season without a major Mario 3D title, but they also want the next Mario to be true quality, and you can't knock them for that. That said, I'm sure they will have multiple contingencies in place specifically for Mario, including a potential Mario Kart World plus Mario Kart Galaxy DLC offering perhaps, and I've also mentioned before an alternative option which I think may have legs, and that's a Mario Maker of some kind of description. The EPD10 group behind Super Mario Bros. Wonder last had a game in 2023, and while Meetup in Bellabelle Park has only just come out, it's a pretty mild expansion in the scheme of things, and the timing reminds me a little of how New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe and Super Mario Maker 2 were released only 5 months apart. I certainly think Nintendo will want a major Mario game to anchor the holiday season if they can possibly help it, and of course, any kind of Mario Maker would make a good showcase for mouse mode, which might be considered of benefit to selling the Switch too. Now, all this doesn't mean that they can just pull complete games from the ether. Obviously, if they don't have the games to release, then they're not going to be able to release them, and this is one reason why I don't think a Luigi's Mansion is especially likely unless it's a Nintendo Switch 2 edition of Luigi's Mansion 3. I think they will have more specific plans for what to do with Luigi, but all the same, they have had plenty of time to get their ducks in a row, and so I could certainly see them having multiple Mario projects that had aimed originally for the 2026 to 2027 window, one of which could well be another Mario Maker. Other suggestions from Nate chime more or less with speculation I put out previously, such as that Fire Emblem would be in the rough slot that we saw Three Houses in, and I personally thought it would be unlikely that we wait too long for Splatoon Raiders, even though theoretically the game has no definitive date. So there seem to be quite a lot of summer games, including those two, and a lot of summer games were mentioned in general, but of course summer can be a broad window, potentially even encompassing September, so we might just want to cool our expectation a little bit in terms of how much will we release in June and July. All that said, this year does feel very dense with games, even if they're titles that aren't necessarily so high on the list for most people, until of course we get to Fire Emblem and Splatoon. The other big news that he had to share was an Ocarina of Time remake expected for holiday 2026. Now, I've been on record about Ocarina of Time for a long time. Eiji Aonuma has a habit of soft teasing future remakes, and this was a key thing for me, but also it's such a major title and will evidently be used as a very significant plank of Zelda lore going into the film, and so it just made sense to me that they would revisit it, especially given that Link's Awakening was the third version of that title, and Ocarina of Time is the oldest of the 3D titles in terms of its second versions, if you like, i.e. the 3D version was in 2011, whereas every single other 3D game, including Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom with their Nintendo Switch 2 editions, have had some kind of upgrade in more recent times. It's also the kind of title that could be used by the development team in the same way that Wind Waker and Link's Awakening were used, as a piece that allows them to experiment with new techniques for future games, specifically in terms of how to perform narrative in their art systems. Breath of the Wild is great in many ways, but the character expressions aren't always exactly anything to write home about, and I do suspect more animatable faces will be a priority for the next title, and perhaps they could have looked at Ocarina of Time as a way to experiment with things like motion capture or other techniques in order to try to make a better version of Zelda storytelling. My suspicion has always been that Nintendo would have a 2027 holiday game for Zelda, though, following up the film. And as I said a while back, if we see Ocarina of Time in 2026, it would be, in some respects, a sign of confidence to me that they could have something else, perhaps some kind of multiplayer spin off or even a 2D title for 2027 to keep that Zelda momentum up. Of course, the potential absence of Mario does change things. It's a very obvious move to do a straight swap of Mario for Zelda if one is ready and the other isn't, and ultimately, while riding the wave after the film might be their optimum timing, the world is imperfect, so perhaps there's not such the likelihood of getting more Zelda in 2027 after all. Now, I'm not going to go into specific forecasts in this video, as I'll let the dust settle, and in any event, I try not to be too swayed by rumours, even when they are broadly credible. I think the outside likelihoods are often more informative, and the fact that these apparently credible leaks are the same notes I've been playing, if not quite in the same order, makes me think I'm probably better off sticking to this. All the same, while I know the Nintendo discussion space has a healthy contingency of Chicken Little aficionados, I don't think the sky's falling on Nintendo anytime soon, and if their second year is marginally less robust than might have been absolutely optimal, it's still head and shoulders above 2018, where their lineup was very bare bones indeed. 2019, though, if you recall, was absolutely massive from about June through to Animal Crossing New Horizons release at the end of the 2019 to 20 fiscal year, and I think a similar density of titles seems likely to be clustered around 2027 and 2028 in what will surely be the year of the Switch 2 Lite as well. As ever, thanks for watching, huge thanks to the channel's Patreon backers, and I will look forward to seeing you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.